let me tell you how excited I am about working with Dr. Gentle-Genitty. She has, unbeknownst to her, she was very early on a contributor to our RaaWee platform and all of the barrier features that occur within the platform. She is a wonderful, wonderful advocate for attendance improvement, not just within her state of Indiana, where she is at Indiana University, but across the country and internationally. She is a past president of the International Association of Truancy and Dropout Prevention, and she is just a really, really wonderful consultant to work with. She is now in partnership with RaaWee as one of our professional services provider, and turn it over to Dr. Gentle-Genitty.
Thank you, Janie. But I also want to start off by, I just loved Pam's presentation. She gave a grounding of attendance and absenteeism that is par none. So kudos, Pam, for all the work that you're doing and the engagement of not just those in your current sphere, but the entire village. I love that concept. I think I'm going to go ahead and continue to take Dwayne's statement that you shared, but we got a Maslow before we bloom. I think it's a fitting context for our conversation today. And Janie does a lot behind the scenes, and you guys probably know she just does so much. So I also want to take my hat off to you for bringing me on board to partner with you. And the partnering that I love bringing to the table just speaks a lot to my belief in finding joy in what I do. And I also believe that if students don't find joy in education, they too will struggle, and so will parents. They won't proactively send them to engage in school or learning. I also believe in what I'm calling, and some of my other colleagues, the idea of the N of one. A lot of times we create policies and practices thinking that it must meet all. And when we do that, there's this 20% of our student population that don't see themselves in the all and want specialized processes and engagement. And I think Pam started off by talking about how she felt as if she was a disruptive child in the early years in terms of education. And several kids feel that way. And so we have to provide opportunities that would bring them to the table to provide an atmosphere that they feel comfortable to be a part. So today's session is really just to help amplify what Pam has already talked about, but to also discuss the ideas of what methods or tools that we should be applying throughout the year, but a focus specifically on how do we prevent absenteeism. So Brandy, I'm assuming that you'll be able to help me navigate the slides as we go through. So the first one then is preventing means knowing. And I think it's almost as if you teed up my presentation well. We cannot prevent something that we don't know. So think about your own self. When you end up experiencing pain is when you reach for some pain medication, albeit Aleve or Tylenol, right? It's only when you experience that pain. Oftentimes, we do not pay attention to the symptoms to prevent that pain from coming. And so when we talk about attendance and absenteeism, what I have here is just a screenshot then of a word cloud that we did with some of our other colleagues. And they talk about things that pop up on a regular basis. They talk about attention demanding, the students who require a lot of attention, who experience some psychosocial functioning, that they demand a lot more attention in class. And when you put all of these things together, these are things that are often symptoms, but because we're so busy in the day-to-day, we don't get to it until we have to take stock of presence or absence, when they've missed the lesson or they've said yes or no to something. And so that means that prevention or preventing anything means that we have to know what we're tracking, which then brings us to the next slide. And this is an opportunity for us then to explore, where are we going? What really matters? When we think about absenteeism, My definition over the years is absenteeism is the sum of a student's in-school and out-of-school experiences, right? So yes, there's a lot within that, but it's what's happening in school that may affect what's happening out of school, or what's happening out of school that may tilt the slide to what's happening in school. As a result of that, the question that we need to continually ask ourselves, exactly what Pam has been asking, what you all have been asking yourself, why does this matter? What really matters in absenteeism? As we move to the next one, we try to unpack what matters. When we think about what matters and what's in school and out of school, there are 5 things that you want to do. The first is pay attention to attending. When we're looking at attending, what does that mean? It means that we're measuring presence in school and presence in curriculum. I'll talk a little bit more about that. But when we talk about absent from school and absent from curriculum, COVID took us down this path of trying to understand attendance like never before. Yes, butts in seats still matters for some. Showing up personally still matters, because there's a lot that we can offer in school that we cannot offer online. But we also recognize during that time, particularly for kids that experienced disability, experienced psychosomatic challenges from going to school, parent worrying about what was going on, attendance also meant that they were still able to engage in the curriculum at some point or the other. And so those students would not really be considered absent because they're engaging at some point with the curriculum. And so when we're tracking, we want to track presence as well as absence, and then maybe partial presence and partial absence. Again, going back to what Pam talked about in her own presentation. The second then is, if we're doing attending well, we're tracking participation, where they're engaged in school life as well as the positive experiences of school. No one of us, not any one of us on this call or even in our own situations, will ever sign up for something that hurts us. If we are not having good experiences, if it's boring, if it's hurtful, it's not something that we gravitate towards doing over and over again. And that means attendance. To prevent it, we have to pay attention to participation. Where are the kids engaging without you having to prompt them? Where are they having fun? Where are they smiling? Where do they believe somebody cares about them? So we gotta pay attention to the engagement in school life and not just the curriculum. The second, the corollary. Where are they not participating? Where are they having negative school experiences that we need to, as a school system, make an adjustment? And the third is in bonding. There's tons of research with this one, particularly my early research in this area about social bonding by Hershey, and Hershey talking about attachment, commitment, involvement, and belief. Where are the students attached when they think about school? When you assess what's going on, where are they attached? Where they're showing up without you having to prompt them? Where are they committed, engaged in group work or clubs where they are going beyond the norm? They're volunteering, showing up with school pride. Where are they involved? Where are they members of something? How many programs and activities are they involved in? How much time are they spending in that area or that particular content or with that teacher? And then lastly, where are they showing school pride, where they believe in what we are selling in the school system? Where's their belief? So again, paying attention to attending, participating, and bonding are the top 3. And those are generally student focused. The latter 2 is, we are collecting a whole bunch of data, tracking a whole bunch of stuff about the entire life of these kids and their families. What specifically needs to be tracked? So have you spent some time figuring out what you're tracking? And again, kudos to Pam in her presentation. She shared all of what they're tracking. And she also spoke to the why. Why do we track these things? And if we know the why, are we paying attention to the trends that are showing up in the data to tell us what needs to be changed? There's a lot of research that's going on now, and the research in itself is talking about, at least just last week and another one yesterday, talking about sleep. And most times, a lot of the scholars in attendance spend at least maybe 10% of their time studying or researching or reviewing articles on sleep. Why? Because students get up real early to go to school. And sometimes attendance has a lot to do with whether or not they got good sleep the night before, and whether or not they are participating in the school environment that's provided, or what else is going on in their lives at home. So the more we paid attention to school, we're recognizing that screen time and lighting makes an impact. When students go to school makes an impact. The quality of their sleep makes an impact, right? So if you begin to think about all of these things that impact attendance and participation and bonding, then the question is, when we're going out to the schools and going out to parents and going out to get them to come back, are there questions around sleep and sleep quality? Are there questions around food? And a lot of times it's whether or not you have enough food, but sometimes it's the quality of the food and when they have that food. The other has to do with homeless and homelessness and what's going on in that process. You saw from COVID, oh my gosh, the number of eviction rates became a huge concern for schools. Are we paying attention to that? And then within the area where the students live, are we paying attention to crime and just the safety of those kids and where they live? Which brings us to the last one when we're tracking in and out of school time, sharing. Are we looking at a holistic deployment of what we're learning? And again, RaaWee does an exemplary job of this, of giving an entire system through which we can look at what's going on in our response. But when we do that, we begin to recognize that every piece matters. The janitor, as Pam said, the bus driver, everybody matters. But if everybody matters and we have so much data, why is it that we still have thousands and millions of kids out of school? And we can't seem to address what needs to be done to address, in essence, and prevent absenteeism. That means that we have to look at strategic networks that move us into what should compel the change. As we move from preventing absenteeism and from in and out of school time, Randy, the next slide brings us into a conversation about why does all of this matter? And all of it matters because control matters. So don't forget all of what you know about absenteeism. I would say add this one as the window through which you look. When you think about absenteeism, think about the level of control that the student has, the parent has, and the school. As you do that, the research suggests that in order for change to occur, we have to impact direct control, indirect control, and internal control. Simplistically, when we have direct control in school, what are the rewards and punishment for showing up? What are the rewards and punishment for not showing up? Parents will do the same. How do they incentivize their kids to teach them that education is important, that they must attend because there's an entire social network that happens at school? And under direct control, we also want to look at what societal impact has, right? A lot of kids believe, oh, I really don't need to go there. I can just Google that. I'll figure out what needs to be done. That's true. There's a lot of skill set that you can get from Googling. There's a lot of skills that you could get from YouTubing. In fact, I do that all the time on things that I'm looking for. I even use Wikipedia on a regular basis. But the challenge is we don't learn teamwork, which is required for a lot of our employment processes, by doing work on our own. We don't learn self-control, managing anger, or responding or communicating when all we're communicating to is a screen. We do not learn critical thinking because nobody is asking us to change our views or opinion. So the more we begin to understand direct control from ourselves, from society, from schools, from parents, the better we'll be able to understand how to prevent absenteeism through awards and punishment. The second is indirect control, that pro-social relationship that happens. Why does a student show up? Why does a student not show up? All of you know this. Some kids may show up just because they have that one teacher who they know will ask, all right, Kim, where were you yesterday? Right? And that little aspect of their life, it may take 1 second to ask him that question, but because of those indirect pro-social relationships, Kim may choose to show up every single day. It's like that person that has a plant in the office, and even though they're on vacation, they may call the other person and ask for help to water the plant, because there is a level of engagement with what's going on. There's some level of commitment. There's some level of pro-social bonding. The research continue to tell us the more students have indirect relationships with schools, with staffers, with personnel, with community partners, the more they are in attendance. So yes, all the programming that we can put in place, all the opportunities that we can offer, all the incentives are good opportunities for students. But at the core, we show up when there is somebody who believes in what we are doing and why we should be there, worries about us, cares about us. Then we show up. It's the same thing we all do as workers. We are willing to leave our current place of employment when nobody checks in on us. Nobody tells us what to do. Nobody cares whether or not we work. When all of that happens, we feel it very easy to go on to another environment or change a job because we don't feel committed. We don't feel pushed to do our best. The same thing with school and the same thing with students. At the core of it is indirect control. They want some sort of pro-social relationship. At the end, indirect control motivates internal and intrinsic reasons. So that becomes our moral compass. Why do we do what we do? Why do we worry about being ethical when nobody else is watching? Why do we force ourselves to get out of bed and go to something that nobody is there physically pushing us to do? All of that happens when we have some of our own internal control. So again, you can see this cup sort of filling as we get to the end, filling up as we get to the end. And that final circle, that full circle happens when direct control, indirect control helps to move the personal compass. And that student knows why they must be in school. They know somebody cares that they would be there, and they're rewarded for being there. A lot of the practices that we have, as mentioned earlier, as well as what you guys continue to read, a lot of our policies and practices have individuals focusing on absence. So we have incentives going to students who have been out of school for a long time and then they come back and we give them a reward. Now put yourself in the position of a student who's always been in attendance, who's always been present and never gets an award, never gets an incentive whatsoever to be successful. It's important that we pay attention to presence. This is another reason why you see schools also updating their tardy policies. Because if the child has gone through all of the challenges with homelessness or clothing or food or not having an alarm clock or not getting good transportation to show up to school and they're a couple minutes late, and you punish them for that tardy without ever acknowledging what they've done well, you are undoing all of the hard work that you have already put in place just by that one disincentive. So re-examining tardis is a key role that we think we can do within our direct control as we move forward. Next slide, Randy. So as we talk about control matters, but how do we get there? The title of our session today has to do with methods, tools, and messaging. And so simplistically, I'm not going to go into too much details, but our methods matter. So re-examining all of what we do and how we do it. What is the what that we do when somebody says we need to pay attention to absenteeism, we need to pay attention to in-school and out-of-school time? The methods matter. And in the methods, I ask you to re-examine data and data use. We have a lot of information about students already. It should not take a rocket scientist to figure out why person X is not showing up in school if we are collecting socio-emotional data, if we are collecting attendance data, if we are collecting homeless data, right? So are we really using the information to inform us, or are we just collecting data? So having a person or some entity or some body helping us regularly to assess the data that we're collecting and to use it appropriately is helpful. The second has to do with performance and indicators, and I'll talk a little bit more about this. But when we talk about performance indicators and benchmark, it's something that comes up consistently. But a lot of people go, oh yeah, we're tracking the data and we're going to let you know how we're doing with it. Yes, that's good, but there's a little bit more that goes into that. You have to have both indicators and benchmarks. I'll talk a little bit more in the next slide about that. But when we talk about the methods, you must have a tool. Who are you collecting the data for? And in our case, everybody. We should be looking at tools for parents, tools for students, tools for staff, tools for community, tools for resources. And all of that together should help us measure the impact that we're making now as well as into the future. Impact is where you want to see change. And that's when we have all those three controls, right? Impact is measured by direct control with rewards and punishment, indirect control, and that personal control that we were talking about earlier. When we do that well, then messaging becomes our golden ticket. Because when we're talking to parents, they are able to see the trends that you are talking about. They're also able to help you follow those trends and push their kids to engage in the things that are working. They see themselves in your data, not negatively, but positively, that I am helping to contribute to that outcome of the number of students who are graduating, the number of students who are going on to college, the number of students who are completing an education, the number of students who are in internships, the number of students who are helping other students doing robotics, all of these positive things that oftentimes we do not share when we are communicating with our parents in our community. So then what do you report? And a lot of times we simply report the attendance rates or the absence rates, and that needs to change. Help the community to understand the why. Help your student to be able to articulate the why to another student. We learn that peer groups, just like peer pressure, impacts attendance. So if a child is absent and you know they're continually a part of a small group of individuals who are always hanging out together, you don't have to figure out who to contact. You ask that other student, where is so-and-so today? But if you've built a good professional relationship from a social work perspective or counseling perspective, where those students trust you and know that you're not going to do it punitively, that you're going to not negatively throw them under the bus, they will let you know what's going on. And it may be as simple as, you know what, Kim had her menstrual yesterday and she messed up in PE, and she is just having a hard time and has chosen not to come to school today, right? Some of that type of information you would never know unless you can reach out to a peer group like that. And so because that student knows the importance of showing up in school, they too may believe in your why and say, yeah, she's missing out today because, you know, we had a really good guest speaker and that guest speaker was talking about internships and she missed all of that. I'm going to have to share some of my information with her. But because she wasn't there, she missed the ice cream social. She didn't get the $25 gift card. She didn't get a whole bunch of stuff. I hope the next time she'll be in school, right? Help them to also sell the why for you. And when you do that, they will know who are the ones that care and why they care. Next slide, Randy. All right, I told you we'll talk a little bit more about data. You continually hear, we live in silos, data is in silos. And I borrowed this slide from online in a discussion that we were having in another session. It helps us understand what we mean by silos. If front desk staff is collecting data, if attendance staff are collecting data, if teachers are collecting data, if the homeless liaisons are collecting data, then which lake is all this data shared in, so that when you want to figure out what's happening with Kim, you could go into the system, enter Kim's name, and it'll show you all the data that we have on file for Kim. You will see that she has missed PE for consistently every third week of the month. We can then correlate that, for instance, with her menstrual cycle, for instance, right? We could see that there was a homeless call that was made, or that there was a bereavement code put in there because somebody in her family died, or maybe it was a primary breadwinner, and then Kim has to change homes to go live with her grandmother as a result. And so what I propose to you in trying to prevent absenteeism is that we need to get out of siloed data, create some relational data systems where we can then have a data lake. And that data lake will allow us to ingest information, catalog that information, distill it for what we need, process it using the various analytical tools, and then pull out insights about each of our students, or students as a group, or students within a school, or students within an entire district or state, that will then inform what we do, the reports that we share, the external data that comes out. But it doesn't happen on our own, and it doesn't happen by ourselves, right? All of us, I'm a trained social worker. I'm not trained in this type of data processing, but as a PhD trained individuals, I'm trained in research and variables and data. And I can then go into a system, pull out information, help you see a lot of that relational data and say, you know what, this seems to be the challenge that we're experiencing. This could be something that we could try out under that pilot phase to see what's going on with our students. And through that type of unified operations where systems are talking with each other, we're able to monitor and evaluate and effectively do a better job in working with our students and preventing absenteeism, preventing some of the things that are impacting in school time and out of school time. And I also mentioned about talking a little bit more, next slide, Randy, about data and data processes in a way that makes sense. So here I want to share with you just a basic example. So when we talk about key performance indicators, a lot of people call these KPIs. Key performance indicators are indicators. Think about indicators as individualized data, meaning you are comparing yourself to what's happening in your individual school system or classroom. So key performance indicators compare yourself to yourself, right? So when we look at this as an example, this is just basic raw data, nothing proprietary or about this one. So we have the year 1, year 2, year 3, similar to what Pam shared in her descriptor, right? And they're tracking a bunch of stuff. But when you're tracking it, are you really digging deep into attendance? Are you really understanding what's there? So if we break down attendance, it may be attendance related to tardies, attendance related to suspensions, excused absence, or unexcused absence. So if you look at number 1, year 1, you could see that we were on a scale of 1 to 6, we were a 5. We were not doing that well on tardies. So we made some adjustments, put in some new processes, and by year 2, we were at a 1. Pretty good, huge improvement. But what happened? It was only a pilot. It was only for a short period of time. Nobody else cared about it. Once that was done, our numbers were good, we let that go. Year 3, we see that we're back up to a 2. Year 4, we're now at a 3. It means that we have not set in very clear indicators to move tardies. We've set a broad goal of absenteeism or tracking attendance, but we're not looking at each variable. So then we must have a constant target for tardies. Like I told you, some of the school districts are looking at tardies, and what they're choosing to do is to choose tardy as an unexcused, excused absence, right? And if they choose it as an excused absence, then can we leverage that just as we are doing with a doctor's note? To say why the student was tardy, allow them to fix that, make up the time, maybe doing some online work or whatever they have missed, or work with the teacher. And that way it doesn't count against the student because the student is in the building, have showed up, is doing the work, engaged with the curriculum. Why are we punishing them? So looking at that. And same thing with suspensions. There are a lot of suspensions that are in-school suspensions. So why are we putting that as an absence in some cases, right? So paying attention to that one. Same thing with unexcused and excused, putting them in charge of the process, but by sharing the levers. So making sure that our indicators are also tracking what we're doing internally in each classroom or across the system, but for self to self. Next slide, Randy. Thank you. All right, a lot there. So how do we define the win? How do we really know that we are winning at preventing absenteeism? How would you know? So if we are clear with the variables like we mentioned, that may give you some idea of what you think you're winning at. The second, variables will measure your bottom line. If you have a bottom line and you don't know what's in it that's being measured, then you need to get rid of that bottom line. I love Pam's idea of the empty strategic plan. I think those are things that are going to help you to move the dial as you go through. And I'll give you a simplistic research example, right? So from research, it says, if I bring these 3 variables together, I think this will happen. Okay, I brought the 3 variables together. I saw a change occur with tardy. Great. But then there are other situations where new variables are being introduced. So I have my old variables, but now I have put in COVID. That's a brand new variable that I didn't figure out before. So that means my bottom line would be different because there's a new variable. And the same thing happens when you do something that's positive. You bring all the variables together and you think all of them are impacting your stuff. And therefore you determine, oh, maybe I really don't need this one. And you remove that one variable. And you say, oh my gosh, my students are even more excited to come to school because I removed the amount of time they could retake a quiz. You are in charge of the variables. You are the one trying to figure out what works and what doesn't work. But it cannot work if you don't constantly evaluate what variables you have that you are using to measure your bottom line. That then means that your return on investment will be difficult. Return on investment means that I have invested $200,000 to hire these new staff members to help me with attendance, right? Good. If you've hired these individuals to help you with attendance and you have adjusted your bottom line, you should then be seeing either an increase or an uptick somewhere in your bottom line. But what happened? You did not connect these systems together. You have new individuals that don't know your population. They do not know your codes. They don't know that your front desk staff, out of your 15 codes, 10 of them are controlled by your front desk staff. You haven't trained your front desk staff. So even though you have brought in a new variable by hiring new staff, without training, without knowledge of the system, without adjustment of the variables, you may not see a return on your investment. So it's going back to that piece. And that then means that tracking and reporting on your success needs to be consistent. It needs to be cyclical. And once you do that well, then you can move into the message that you want to share. And it's that message combined with the bullet points above that will help you define your win. Next slide. All right, a lot of information thrown at you. It's important that you know prevention means knowing. In school and out of school experiences count. You must know your variables that you are tracking. And if a variable is not allowing you to move the way that you should, remove that variable, introduce a new variable, start a new pilot. The goal is to fail fast in finding solutions. The quicker you try something and it doesn't work, the quicker you can fix it and bring in something new. The quicker you try something and it works, the quicker you're able to scale it up and make sure that you're sharing it with a team. Once you influence your team, then it's together you'll be able to define your win. But you cannot do that on your own because every aspect of a student's life is influenced by the entire experience of in and out of school. I'll give you a basic example. I went to a university for a visit and I loved the idea of going there because they had so much good information on their website. A lot of them were talking about the successes they were having. But I arrived at the institution and there was not good parking. And I reached out for help to one of the staff members that was there, and the person couldn't really help me. My experience was not that good. By this time, I had spent maybe a good half an hour out of the visit just trying to find parking, trying to find somebody that could help me, figuring out the details. And after an hour, I just gave up. And I said, you know what, I have a lot of other things to do. This may not be a good opportunity for me today. When we talk about sharing an experience, if we do not share it with the entire cultural group within which we interact in a school system, from how the groundskeeper keep the grounds, from what we do in our parking lot, to the signage that we use, to what's used in the classroom and what seats they sit on, whether or not bathrooms are accessible, if we don't address the infrastructure, the personnel, as well as the curriculum and the tracking, our success will be non-existent because it's those everyday experiences that students find friction in that will be hard. A lot of our school systems are set up like prisons, where there's a central office at the front that supposedly overlooks everything else that's going in and out of the school. Those are good for safety, but they're not good for school climate because it means that they're hidden and blind spots that we don't see You won't see the street that's behind the school that has a lot of potholes, that during the rain or snow, that people don't want to drive there. And so it adds 5 minutes to their commute, and therefore the students are late. It's important then that we collaborate often and partner with as many individuals that we can, so we can remove those blind spots, and that we know the experience for kids really, really work. We've seen in some other areas that some students miss school. Sometimes they show up for classes and they're missing right after lunch because they do not like the cafeteria food and they go somewhere else. By the time they get their food, it's late. Some of the schools don't let them back in, or they're worried about not being let back in or being marked tardy, and they just leave. So we have to explore, and we won't get to all of that unless we partner. And that's going to help us to share our why. In doing that, it means that we update our methods, update our tools, and making sure that we're very clear that the messaging matters. I think that brings us to the end, Randy, of the discussion for today. If not, I think there's one more slide. I want to then share with you that there's the opportunity, if you can, at any point, if you do want to collaborate with us, we're working with RaaWee to just offer resources. So if you need help to look at your data and do strategic planning and implementation, or just to provide new strategies on prevention or intervention, there's also some on data. The more we chafe up against attendance and attendance challenges, the more we see that policy needs to be changed. And a lot of times people see policy as this thing on the wall that is irremovable. And I get it, but policies only become policies when there's a large number of people say, we want this change. We push and we get our community partners engaged, our legislatures listen, and then they make a policy for that time and for that group. But it's also the same when we need to change a policy. When we see a lot of individuals chafing up against something that does not work, it's telling all of us and policymakers that new policies need to be put in place. And you see right now with COVID, there are new policies around attendance, new policies around engagement, new policies about as long as students are engaged in the curriculum, that could be marked as present. And when you talk about that, sometimes school districts like, oh, I didn't know much about that, I've not spent time with that. Those are some of the things that we could help you engage in as well. So thank you so much for your time and for listening. I would love to have a conversation with you if you have questions and or comments.
Thank you, Carolyn. Please put your questions in the question box. And while we're waiting for questions to pop in, if you have not read her works, she is the author and or co-author on many research papers, things that can really be put into practice in your districts. So I would encourage you to Google her name, and you will find quite a bit of resources that she has for your implementation.
Thank you so much, Jenny. You're always nice to me. And in this work, to be honest, we are partners. I am by no means a full expert. You're the expert of your students in your district and what's going on in your environment. And sometimes we are too much of an expert that we think we have a good understanding of all that's occurring. But sometimes just an outsider would say, oh, you know, why are you doing that? Right? It's like we had I'm deviating here, so let me know if I'm off, but we had a summit here in Indiana, and we were talking about some of the students getting tardies because it took them a long time to get from one part of the school building to another. Now, where or how is that the student's fault for walking from one point to another and that being considered a tardy, right? But one of the individuals in the audience said, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you brought that up because I have been short my entire life. And my stride is not as long as somebody else's, and I always got tardy. And she said, I always disliked school because of that thing. So sometimes it may just be some of the structures that we have in place. And so why have we not updated our tardy policies or the time between buildings if we keep expanding buildings or adding on a new section or a new annex? And so there's a lot of these things that I think we just need to pay attention to and revisit to ensure that we are helping our students where they should and how we think we can best help them. Again, going back to Pam's point and the raising a village, but we must Maslow before we bloom. I'm borrowing that from you, Pam, as we go forward.
That's a good one. Okay, well, we don't have any questions. You are always super thorough. You will also have the opportunity to ask your questions of Dr. Gentle-Genitty after the fact too. So thank you so much.